It's Saturday. To our Jewish friends, Shabbat Shalom, and depending on what country you're in, soon to be Motzei Shabbat. Of course, our Sabbath is not in a day, it's in Jesus, the risen Messiah, who's coming again. And so with this in view, we begin. Next week, however, we'll be coming to you from Jerusalem, Israel. Our update will be from the Promised Land, the Holy Land. Call it what you may. No place does prophecy come to life more than it does in the Middle East, especially in Israel, and most especially in Jerusalem, from where our broadcast will be coming next Saturday. But for this week, let's begin at the beginning. Some of you have been to Israel and have been to the Golan Heights. You've seen the Israeli electronic monitoring facilities. You've seen the fortifications. You've looked with binoculars across into Syria, across the UN demilitarized zone. That entire landscape has changed. There have been incursions into the UN zone by limited numbers of Iranian forces in the past, not there at the moment, but they've been there. But now ISIS, who has again targeted Israel with mortar attacks. The last time this happened, Israel, of course, responded, killing at least 4 members of ISIS and wiping out their command position in an abandoned UN facility. Proceeding further north, towards the Mount of Transfiguration, Har Hermon, Mount Hermon, on the northeastern slopes, Al-Qaeda now has positions. And these are the very places where Jesus walked, where Jesus was transfigured with Moses and Elijah. This is the front line of the current conflict, the line of battle. In the past, the Syrian regime of Assad used Hezbollah and Lebanon as its platform to harass Israel, keeping the Golan Heights generally peaceful. That has all changed now. Things are being pushed to the point of conflict. They've already happened. I'm only hoping that tourist groups will not be restricted from going up to the Golan Heights anymore if these skirmishes continue. The Israelis are monitoring them very closely. They've increased both armor and artillery positions, as well as radar and other monitoring of what is happening inside of Syria in what has become an endless imbroglio that has killed perhaps as many as 500,000 people, perhaps as many as 500,000 Muslims killed by other Muslims. Unfortunately, in that number have been also a considerable contingent of Christians who are fighting for the very last remnant of their survival in both Iraq and in Syria, and in many other countries in the Middle East. Only Israel, of course, firmly secures the safety of Arab Christians. Outside of Israel, Christianity in the Middle East is under threat. It's under threat in Egypt. The Coptics are under pressure. Although General Assisi is protective, the Muslim Brotherhood has been waging continual harassment and terror against Christians. The most recent Easter attacks on the Coptic Christians in Egypt. Now, when I use the term Christian, I use it broadly. Yet there are a number of Pentecostals and other evangelicals, and there are some born-again believers within the Coptic Church, for instance. I'm using the term Christian very broadly. These are Catholics, these are Monophysite, these are from different Eastern Orthodox and Eastern Church traditions. I use the term Christian with a small c. But there are evangelicals and born-again believers within that community that is being systematically exterminated by Islam, both Iranian Islam and Sufi Islam. Thank God for Israel. Thank God Israel protects its Christian community. Yet hypocritically, so much of the world, including ostensibly Christian nations, and including hypocritical and morally and spiritually and theologically bankrupt denominations, like the Presbyterians, are singling out Israel as the bad guy in the Middle East, turning their back on the plight of persecuted Christians, when in fact Israel is the only country in the Middle East where Christians are secure. And we're speaking primarily of Arab Christians. Let us continue. ISIS is active in Syria. They've had major setbacks. Mr. Trump has increased American action against them. This is for sure. You have American troops now in eastern Syria, but they are there. and they are on the Israeli border of the Golan Heights. In small numbers, difficult to detect their positions, but once they open fire, the Israelis return fire immediately. That's the way it has to be. But this cannot go on indefinitely. It will become a type of Gaza situation if it's not resolved by other powers inside Syria, where Hamas targets Israeli civilians from inside Gaza, then uses their own civilians as human shields, so that when the Israelis fire back, the CNN and BBC are most happy to say, look what the Israelis did, ignoring the fact they were doing it in self-defense, and that Islamic forces are using their own civilians as human shields. Well, this kind of scenario can take shape in Syria if the situation in Syria is not eventually resolved. More importantly is Iranian aims. Iran, partnered with Russia, is backing Assad because of the Alewa sect of Islam, is a theological cousin to Shia, who are in opposition, of course, to the Saudi-backed Sunni and the Salafists. It is a big mess. You've got a war within Islam between the Salafists, between the radical Sunnis, who are supported by the House of Saud and by the regime in Saudi Arabia, the royal family. They are funding radical Islamic elements. At the same time, Iran is backing radical elements. Saudi Arabia is not a friend of America. It's just an enemy of Iran. Iran is an enemy of everyone. But Barack Obama decided to treat Iran like a friend and treat Israel like an enemy. As we speak, Iran has pressed again for the right to purchase from Kazakhstan, another Muslim country, under internationally controlled brokerage and a control policy that is internationally monitored, 950 tons of fissionable grade uranium known as yellow cake. The last time they made this application, Great Britain blocked it, not America. Barack Obama, ever the friend of Iranian terror, who unbridled $150 billion to the Iranian government while Iran was funding terror to kill American troops in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan. Together with John Kerry, Obama approved the sale of the yellow cake to Iran, but it was blocked by Britain. Now it is time for the Trump administration to take on the challenge of the Iranian intent to purchase the yellow cake. And we do pray and hope and expect that the Trump administration will reverse the policies of Barack Obama, who did everything he could to help the Iranians to carry out the war of terror against Israel, against America, against moderate Muslims, against Christians, and above all against the existence of Israel. This was the policy of Barack Obama and John Kerry. Even when American naval personnel were seized in the Persian Gulf and publicly humiliated on TV, John Kerry went on television and sung the praises of the Iranians for their cooperation while Americans were kneeling with their hands on their head at gunpoint.
توسط مسئولین در تهران صورت گرفت و اجرایی شد توسط ما.
I want to underscore how pleased I am that our sailors were safely returned into United States hands this morning. I also want to thank the Iranian authorities for their cooperation and quick response. These are always situations which, as everybody here knows, have an ability, if not properly guided, to get out of control. And I'm appreciative for the quick and appropriate response of the Iranian authorities. All indications suggest or tell us that our sailors were well taken care of, provided with blankets and food, and assisted with their return to the fleet earlier today. And I think we can all imagine how a similar situation might have played out 3 or 4 years ago. And in fact, it is clear that today this kind of issue was able to be peacefully resolved and efficiently resolved, and that is a testament to the critical role that diplomacy plays in keeping our country safe, secure, and strong.
If there was ever a president who should have been impeached for treason, I believe it is Barack Obama. Now, there are other presidents who've done similar things. There's been a heritage of treason in the White House, but none has gone as far as Barack Obama, directly giving tens of billions of dollars to a terrorist state committed to the killing of Americans, the persecution of Christians, and the destruction of America. We've seen betrayals by the House of Bush concerning the Saudi Arabian Wahhab, calling the Saudis our friends while they persecuted Christians and funded radical Islam. We've seen betrayal by Bush, as the Bush administration betrayed America and the West and Israel to the Saudis. Obama has gone even further in betraying America, the West, and Israel to the Iranians. But it goes way back. We are now haunted by a legacy of betrayal. What we see happening in North Korea, the highly problematic situation we're encountering in North Korea, cannot be divorced from the Middle East scenario. North Korea has been supplying weapons and weapons-grade technology to anyone who wanted to buy it, including the Iranians. North Korea has never failed to sell any weapon that it has developed. North Korea and Iran have both embarked on missile launch delivery systems of weapons of mass destruction, and both have aggressive programs for the development of nuclear weapons, North Korea already technically being a low-grade nuclear power. But let's understand how this happened. This goes back again to the betrayal, to the man who built the Iron Curtain, Harry Truman. Many Christians looked favorably upon Harry Truman because he was supportive of the establishment of the State of Israel in the aftermath of the Holocaust, and that is correct. But it was Harry Truman who stood by and let Joseph Stalin violate the Yalta Treaty and build the Iron Curtain. The Cold War began during his administration, the term Cold War being defined initially by Sir Winston Churchill on a visit to the United States in a speech he gave in Missouri after the Second World War.
It is my duty to place before you certain facts about the present position in Europe. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe: Warsaw, Berlin, Prague, Vienna, Budapest, Belgrade, Bucharest, and Sofia. All these famous cities and the populations around them lie in what I must call the Soviet sphere. And all are subject, in one form or another, not only to Soviet influence, but to a very high and in some cases increasing measure of control from Moscow. An attempt is being made by the Russians in Berlin to build up a quasi-communist party in their zone of occupied Germany by showing special favors to groups of left-wing German leaders. At the end of the fighting last June, the American and British armies withdrew westward in accordance with an earlier agreement to a depth at some points of 150 miles upon a front of nearly 400 miles, in order to allow our Russian allies to occupy this vast expanse of territory which the Western democracies had conquered. If now the Soviet government tries by separate action to build up a pro-communist Germany in their areas, this will cause new serious difficulties in the American and British zones and will give the defeated Germans the power of putting themselves up to auction between the Soviets and the Western democracies. Whatever conclusions may be drawn from these facts, in fact they are, this is certainly not the liberated Europe we fought to build up, nor is it one which contains the essentials of permanent peace. On the other hand, ladies and gentlemen, I repulse the idea that a new war is inevitable, still more that it is imminent. It is because I am sure that our fortunes are still in our hands, in our own hands, and that we hold the power to save the future, that I feel the duty to speak out now, that I have the occasion and the opportunity to do so. I do not believe that Soviet Russia desires war. What they desire is the fruits of war and the indefinite expansion of their power and doctrines. But what we have to consider here today, while time remains, is the permanent prevention of war and the establishment of conditions of freedom and democracy as rapidly as possible in all countries. Our difficulties and dangers will not be removed by closing our eyes to them. They will not be removed by mere waiting to see what happens, nor will they be removed by a policy of appeasement. What is needed is a settlement, and the longer this is delayed, the more difficult it will be, and the greater our dangers will become. There never was a war in history easier to prevent by timely action than the one which has just desolated such great areas of the globe. It could have been prevented, in my belief, without the firing of a single shot, and Germany might be powerful, prosperous, and honored today. But no one would listen. And one by one we were all sucked into the awful whirlpool. And surely, ladies and gentlemen, I put it to you, surely we must not let that happen again. This can only be achieved by reaching now, in 1946, this year, 1946, by reaching a good understanding on all points with Russia under the general authority of the United Nations organization, and by the maintenance of that good understanding through many peaceful years, by the world instrument, supported by the whole strength of the English-speaking world and all its connections. Neither the sure prevention of war nor the continuous rise of world organization will be gained without what I have called the fraternal association of the English-speaking people.
The only question is, in the Cold War, whose side was Harry Truman on? It was under Harry Truman that Chiang Kai-shek was allowed to fall and Mao allowed to come to power. It was Harry Truman who served country after country to the communists on a silver platter, when America had the nuclear capacity to do anything it wanted and stop anyone it wanted. Then it was Harry Truman who fired Douglas MacArthur, who would not allow MacArthur to complete the victory. General Ridgway was a very good general also, but as MacArthur said, there's no substitute for victory. Truman said there was. What's happening now in North Korea is the ugly ghost of Harry Truman. He's rotting in his grave, but his legacy threatens to put the rest of us in our graves. We've had a series of presidents, one after another, who've done America nothing but harm. I believe that these terrible presidents are judgments. Nations always get the leaders they deserve, as in the books of Kings. What we're seeing in North Korea is because of Harry Truman, primarily. What we are seeing with Iran is because of Barack Obama, primarily. What we are seeing is a judgment. Will God give America and the West a respite? Will he give us leaders who are guided by his principles and who have a sense of prophecy? That remains to be seen. I pray for Mr. Trump every day and would urge others to do so, but let's understand something. He gave a commitment to move the embassy to Jerusalem. Now, all of the American embassy cannot be relocated from Tel Aviv for the simple reason that the Israeli Defense Headquarters, the Ministry of Defense of Israel, the Mossad headquarters, and other things related to defense particularly, are located in Tel Aviv. Hence, the military attaché's office and other embassy facilities can't be put in Jerusalem. They have to be in Tel Aviv, where the Israeli military is headquartered for defense cooperation and intelligence cooperation. But there needs to be at least a door seal, a symbolic move of the address, an ambassador's office in Jerusalem. Pray that Mr. Trump keeps that commitment. It can be placed in West Jerusalem. There is an all but empty American property owned by the State Department that is in West Jerusalem already, as well as a vacant lot property that was designated to build an embassy. These were in areas that were not part of East Jerusalem. It is the American consulate in Jerusalem that is in East Jerusalem. The embassy would not have to go on to the East Jerusalem side of what some people call the Green Line. Let's understand this even further. Mr. Trump has agreed to meet with Mr. Abbas. We all know that Hamas are nothing but terrorists who oppress their own people. They're a terrorist organization. They control Gaza, and they have a certain amount of operatives in the West Bank. But this idea that Mr. Abbas is a lesser of evils is a folly. He is not a lesser of evils. Mr. Abbas heads the Palestinian Authority who pay people to murder. They name streets and build monuments to suicide bombers who kill innocent civilians, who stab people on buses, who attack school children. He pays the families financial rewards and inducements to kill, and he receives international aid to do it, including from the United States. He has an office, a diplomatic mission in Washington, D.C. If Mr. Trump meets with Mr. Abbas, the first thing Mr. Trump needs to tell him is, this needs to end now. There'll be no more American aid or assistance. We will not even talk to you, and we will close your mission in Washington and cease all liaison with you, all cooperation with you. Give the Israelis a free hand to do as they like without any reference to you if your continued support of terror doesn't stop, of teaching children to glorify terrorists in school, on sports teams, in Boy Scouts. This is what Abbas does. He's a two-faced liar. He's a sponsor of terror. Barack Obama, in effect, did the same thing, giving tens of billions to Iran. Tens of billions, and a green light to continue in nuclear development, even wanting to sell them the yellow cake. Mr. Trump has inherited quite a mess. But notice the role of Russia in these things. Russia is this week increasing again its almost silly bomber patrols up the coast of Alaska and the North Pacific with these old 1950s era rickety-rack, non-upgraded, propeller-driven bombers. You could shoot them down with a pea shooter. But there is a symbolic gesture to him. Why is he doing this? With the price of oil no higher than $50 a barrel most of the time, and if it does go above 50, it usually sinks down again below 50. With the advent of fracking, with an international glut, with the Saudi Arabians angry at him for his support of Assad, he has a problem. 50% of the government revenues of Russia depend on oil. It would be possible for the United States and Saudi Arabia to get together and drive the price of oil down below $35 a barrel, even temporarily at least, to $25 a barrel, and some American fracking could remain profitable at $35. This would devastate the Russian economy. What if the West said, what if we support the Chechens the way you're supporting the Iranians if you want to support Islamic terror? And it was disclosed by the Pentagon this past week that Russia, of all nations, is involved in helping Taliban in Afghanistan, bearing in mind that the Taliban once fought them. This highlights Mr. Putin's obsession with having lost the Cold War, trying to revive Russia, even as he pursues economic and foreign policies that brought Russia down. He bankrupted it. With those policies, the Communist Party bankrupted Russia. Now he's implementing those same policies. And what the old Soviet Union did was rattle their sabers, deploy the SS-20 missiles towards Europe. Aggression towards Europe to try to unify the country based on some external threats. Well, there's no external threat to Mr. Putin except the one he's making by scaring people in the Baltic states, in Poland, and in, of course, in Ukraine. He knows his economy is heading to be the next Venezuela. It'll take longer, but it will end up the same way. Venezuela has a lot more oil than Russia, and it's not light crude. Like Russia does not have a tremendous amount of light crude. It requires a certain amount of refining. Venezuelans can't eat oil. What will happen when it costs more to pump the oil than the oil is worth on the market? The only thing Mr. Putin has to resort to is saber rattling. That's what he's doing. China plays that same game. It's heading for trouble economically, and it knows it. So it saber rattles. These parties are desperate to keep power, and desperate people do desperate things. It is not difficult to understand, in light of Ezekiel, why Mr. Putin acts as he does. If there is indeed a Gog and Magog scenario that takes place prior to the final one at the end of the millennium in the book of Revelation, why would Russia, that has a demographic problem, that's under an internal demographic threat from the Islamic growth rate, that has had even Islamic terror attacks this past week on the subway system in St. Petersburg, to say nothing of what happened with the Ossetians from the Chechens, when 4-year-old Russian children were shot in the back, or when Islamic extremists took over the theater. What is he thinking? What interest does he have? He had the stupid idea that by creating instability in the Middle East, he would artificially drive up the price of oil and gas that would benefit Russia, but that hasn't happened. The only way to understand his game now is to understand it in light of the Word of God. I will put hooks in your jaws and draw you in order to destroy you. Is a Gog and Magog scenario beginning to take shape? I cannot be categorically definitive, but it is a viable proposition, and it's something to watch. Russia having a rapprochement with Turkey, and Turkey having its own interest in Syria, and then the Iranian factor. Mr. Erdogan in Turkey this week, in what is generally thought of in Europe as a rigged election. Why Mr. Trump called him to congratulate him, I don't know. He's a dangerous Islamic nationalist.
Turkish President Recep Erdogan's divisive, razor-thin national referendum win now means he has sweeping powers. But he tells CNN in an exclusive interview he is not a dictator.
For a dictatorship to exist, you don't necessarily have to have a presidential system.
Outside observers, though, suspect a rigged election and that this was more about Erdogan gaining power than improving Turkey's political system. Only Western leader to call Erdogan and congratulate him? Donald Trump. No mention of concerns observers have that ballots were manipulated or illegally counted, that there was intimidation, that the election happened during a state of emergency after last year's coup attempt, during which Erdogan's government fired or suspended more than 100,000 people, including teachers and journalists. He jailed tens of thousands of others. Today, a Trump administration official tells CNN the president is aware of all of that. On the other hand, Turkey is a vital NATO ally in the counterterrorism field. If your policy is America first and protecting America, there are times when you're going to be picking from some imperfect options. Still, 0 European leaders joined Trump in contacting Erdogan. Others who did congratulate him include Hamas, Qatar, and Bahrain.
There are political consequences of this, but I think the president obviously made a decision to continue to reinforce our relationship with Turkey, given the circumstances of facing ISIS on the ground.
He is trying to Islamize Turkey, and he's succeeding. He was given expanded presidential powers in this election. It's becoming less and less democratic in Turkey, more and more fundamentalist, more and more Sharia, and more ambitious. Erdogan is a nefarious figure. Mr. Trump cannot negotiate with him and shouldn't try to be his friend, any more than he should have tried to be Mr. Putin's friend. Mr. Trump learned very quickly, you can't be a friend of Putin. Well, he'll learn just as quickly, you cannot be a friend of Erdogan. You can't trust these people. But let's move on. What else has happened this week that Christians have noticed and are concerned with? It's interesting that Bruce Jenner, who now calls himself Caitlyn, and demands to be seen as a woman, despite the fact that the DNA in every cell in his body says he's a man. You're either XY or you're double X. Said if Mr. Trump makes any kind of a move on homosexuals and lesbian advancement, he's going after Trump. It's so curious when you see the increasing arrogance and militancy of homosexuals that they don't realize they're simply fulfilling what Romans 1 said would happen. God would give them over to the perversion to think it's natural. They'd be emboldened in it and convinced by it, so they would have no alternative but eternal destruction.
Joining me now in the audience, Shagun Oduolowu, entertainment journalist, Zoe Tur, pilot and reporter who herself is transgender, and Ben Shapiro, senior editor, Breitbart News, author of Bullies. Ben, did she deserve this award?
For what?
For courageously coming forward, for having been an athlete of great prowess and now fighting a new battle.
What exactly is the battle? I mean, self-definition is what you do, and my baby's doing it at 18 months old. I wasn't aware that you get a medal for it.
To come out transgender is horribly difficult. It is the most difficult thing you can do. I've been overseas. I've flown helicopter missions, surveillance missions. I've been shot, stabbed. Being brave is being yourself, and being transgender is about the bravest thing you can do. Did she deserve the award? Yes.
Why are we mainstreaming delusion?
It's not delusion.
Why would you call it delusion?
Because Caitlyn Jenner, I'll call him Caitlyn Jenner.
No,
because
it's her. You're not being polite to the pronouns.
Because
disrespectful.
Okay, forget about the disrespect. Facts don't care about your feelings. It turns out that every chromosome, every cell in Caitlyn Jenner's body is male, with the exception of some of his sperm cells. It turns out that his brain structure is male. It turns out that he still has all of his male appendages. How he feels on the inside is irrelevant to the question of his biological sex.
What? In terms of the science behind gender dysphoria, you're very familiar with that, Zoe.
Very familiar.
It's not about the chromosomes within our nuclei. Yeah, go ahead.
Chromosomes don't necessarily mean you're male or female.
Gender.
With gender
identity. Go ahead. No, so
especially, but even so, you have a thing like Klinefelter's syndrome. So you don't know what you're talking about. You're not educated on genetics.
Would you like to discuss the genetics?
No.
What are your genetics?
So I'd stay away from the genetics and back to the brain scans.
You cut that out now, or you'll go home in an ambulance.
Yeah, that seems mildly inappropriate for a political discussion.
No, I know. Well, but wait, to be fair, but to be fair, you're actually being rude. And that's not fair.
I'm sorry, it's not rude to say that someone who is biologically a male is a male. Someone who is biologically male is a male.
But Mr. Shapiro, you knew very well that saying that to Zoe would be egregiously insulting.
It's not a matter of insulting or inflammatory.
It
is.
It's a fact. No, well,
you're a male. Dr. Drew is a male.
Sir, you're right. On paper, what is a fact is a fact, and I can't deny that. But you knew that going in, that saying that to Zoe would be aggressively insulting.
It's not a matter of aggressively insulting.
It is.
The entire discussion is whether we are embracing mental illness and delusion as a society. That's the entire discussion.
No. Well, ways to save lives. I believe that Caitlyn Jenner bringing this conversation to the forefront is saving lives. And at the end of the day, can you look at the fact that more than 50% of transgender youth attempt suicide because of discrimination, because of shame? Does that try to alter the way that how you should project your thoughts? What if they're watching right now? What if there's a teen out watching right now that is struggling with who they are, living their truth?
Let's talk about some of the biological facts for 1 second.
No, I want you to answer me. What would you say to a teen right now that really believes 100%?
Allow me to answer your question.
I'm full of emotion right now because people die.
I've noticed.
Clearly, it doesn't bother you because you're sitting there stone-faced and cold-hearted.
Of course it bothers me when people commit suicide, which is one of the reasons I don't believe that transgender surgery is the solution, considering that the suicide rate after transgender surgery is precisely the same as the suicide rate before transgender surgery.
Yeah, because then technically they're not passing, and then they're open for more discrimination.
Okay, the transgender suicide rate is approximately 0.8 in every 100. The only comparable suicide rate in human history of which I am aware is Jews living under Austrian and German rule during World War II. To liken the treatment of transgenders in the United States or the Western world to Jews living under Nazi... No, I'm actually comparing apples to apples in terms of the suicide rate.
But I think if you can see what discrimination does...
Why don't we look at actual solutions?
Why is it then stop hating, tolerate.
It's not, I'm happy to tolerate. Whatever people want to do is what they want to do, but the idea that the surgery itself is something to be glorified, to be reveled in the mental illness...
I think if you can bring up the difficulty that Jewish people have faced because of hatred, then why can't you as a human, as Dr. Maya Angelou would say that I am human, so therefore nothing human can be alien to me. Why can't you take that position and understand based upon your history?
I don't hate anybody who has a mental illness and is trying to figure out how to fix that.
There might have been people who said...
I'm not going to liken the treatments of Jews under Nazis.
No, I think anytime a life is in trouble, we're all in trouble. We're all in trouble.
The reason I brought that up is as a comparison of the treatments of the two and saying that the suicide rate is similar. So therefore, if the circumstances of the two are different, and the
circumstances may not be different. If you have bullying, if you have murders, there is a genocide on transgender children right now.
I think we are missing. I think we are going so far afield. As all people, we should be for inclusion. As a black person and as a Jewish person who knows what persecution is, we should all be for inclusion. No one is saying that we should not be for inclusion. At least I'm not. What I'm saying about this award is Caitlyn Jenner does not walk in the shoes of those young transgender youth because they don't have the means that she has. So when we say that she's supposed,
how she was as a teenager,
and you cannot deny the fact that she gave hope to somebody out there. They may not have the $70,000 to have the surgery. They may not have a white gown and get to walk away with an SB.
I've got to wrap it there. I got to wrap it there. Ben, let me just deal with your biological question, mental illness question. Let's say that transgender is a illness. How would you? What's the goal of treatment then?
The goal of treatment would be to cure whatever
Can't cure it. It's not curable.
Okay.
Lots of illnesses are not curable. This one has to not be curable. What's alcoholism? Alcoholism, for instance. What's the goal?
So the goal would be to allow people to live with it in an appropriate way.
To flourish, right?
To flourish.
Not to require them to assign to one gender or another, but to flourish.
Right. Without imposing on the rest of society a necessity for fictionalized thinking. Okay, because that actually is a cost to society. I'm sorry, but my grandfather was bipolar, okay?
Yeah.
And he thought that the radio was talking to him.
Yeah.
They put him in a mental hospital. They did not tell him the radio was talking to him to allow him to live a better life. They put him into a mental hospital, and then they gave him lithium, which allowed him to live a better life. Looking for better solutions than transgender surgery would be a better solution than pretending that transgender surgery is the cure.
People are looking for treatments all the time.
It is almost impossible for someone like Mr. Jenner not to spend eternity in hell. God balks at his enemies. But Romans 1 also tells us it's not only people like him. It's those who give hearty approval to what they do. People like Hillary Clinton and others. Hell is a real place. I fear for them because their arrogance and their aggression is symptomatic of the fact that their destiny is in the hand of Satan, that God has given them over, that they're virtually beyond salvation. Virtually. It's almost impossible for someone with a spirit of error to whom God has given over to repent. Let's go further with this now. The rise of this homosexual issue is going to be a problem in America. The Supreme Court hopefully will take on this case of Christian rights, where Christian bake shop owners are forced to bake cakes for same-sex weddings against their religious convictions. Thank God Mr. Gorsuch was appointed, and if rumor is to be believed, there will be another Supreme Court appointee on the horizon in the not-too-distant future. Hopefully we will have another constitutionalist. Mr. Pence, of course, is a committed believer. This puts him in a particularly precarious position. We've already seen the corrupt Republican Party establishment. You can watch on YouTube Dick Cheney with his lesbian daughter, who's married to a lesbian, and a same-sex lesbian wedding. And Laura Bush, the wife of George Bush, calling on the Republican Party to cease its opposition to same-sex marriage. This is the Republican Party establishment. These are people with no principles and no morals. They've always pretended to be conservative and to uphold family values at election time in order to con naive and undiscerning evangelicals into voting for them. But we know what they really are. The Bush administration was owned by the Saudi Arabians who carried them around in their back pocket, even as they persecuted Christians, funded anti-Semitism and Islamic radicalism. This is the Bush family. These are people with no scruples, no morals whatsoever, just evil, evil people. Old man Bush is quite sick now. I don't know how long he has, but for his sake I pray he repents. He said, Saudi Arabia is our friend. Those were his exact words. A regime that beheads people for becoming Christians is no friend of America. They're only friends of George Bush, because he's a friend of the devil. Please tell him I said so. From the skull and crossbones to the Freemasonry in which these people are emerged, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, we should not make the mistake of thinking that the Republican Party establishment, or in any sense really conservative, or in any sense a friend of Christians. They are not. But we do have Christians, people who have the spirit of Jesus within that corrupt system. Mr. Pence is one of them. Please pray for him and his family, and please pray for Mr. Trump. A major change has happened this week in news media. The ratings of the networks and network news, ABC, NBC, CBS, are a joke. CNN, domestically within the United States, and even internationally to a degree, are not very high. And MSNBC is, again, another joke. Fox has towered as it was built under Roger Ailes, who left forcibly due to sex scandals involving Gretchen Carlson and so forth. Now it's come to Bill O'Reilly. Bill O'Reilly is probably irreplaceable. He had the highest ratings of any news broadcast on cable year after year after year. And even when the scandals were disclosed, his ratings did not go down. The vulnerability came when advertisers began withdrawing. Over 50 of them. They were being targeted by the left, by women's groups, and the New York Times article, the 1st of April, that disclosed Mr. O'Reilly and Fox had paid $13 million in out-of-court settlements to keep a lid on allegations of sexual harassment. You don't pay $13 million unless there's something there. He unfortunately gave the left the ammunition they needed to hang him. It's all hypocrisy. Nobody ever went after Bill Clinton for his sex scandals in the White House. The man was a sex pervert, an open sex pervert. We know what Clinton did. It wasn't even natural. He was a complete freak, as well as a serial womanizer. He got a pass. It's all politically orchestrated, and it's all predicated upon a power play, not upon any righteous indignation. This ridiculous lawyer, Miss Bloom, whoever she is, and her client, Miss Burgess, are not even factors. The factors are the corporate sponsorship and the advertisers. That is what happened. Bill O'Reilly will be irreplaceable. Now, I didn't always agree with him. I certainly didn't always agree with him theologically. He's a Roman Catholic, and I certainly thought he was too weak both times that he interviewed Barack Obama. He was far too weak. Yet he's very, very good at what he did. Nobody comes near him. God bless Tucker. Tucker may be a Christian. I think he's going to do well. Tucker could easily replace Megyn Kelly and do better than her, and he has. But Bill O'Reilly will be irreplaceable. Fox may see a decline. They've moved the rubbish show, The Five, into prime time, things that almost show a managed decline, an intent to decline, led by Rupert Murdoch's sons. Rupert Murdoch now married to Jerry Hall, one of Mick Jagger's exes, in his very old age. He's not really in full control anymore, obviously, due to his age. Be that as it may, Fox is going to change. It already has been changing. Roger Ailes is gone, Megyn Kelly's gone, now Bill O'Reilly is gone. It will not be the same network. The question is, can we say, so what? What Donald Trump did was circumvent the mainstream media. Even when Megyn Kelly within Fox turned against him, it didn't work. He circumvented it with Twitter and with other internet avenues of reaching the people directly. Will cable news matter? Cable news displaced the networks. Now, direct news is replacing cable news. The first person to be pushed out of Fox was Glenn Beck, unfortunately a Mormon, but somebody who I generally agree with politically otherwise. He began his own enterprise. He said the future is going to be internet TV. Well, Roku is internet TV. Moriel TV is that. It is the future. Young people don't really watch TV much anymore, and every year they watch it less. Fox's viewership are people who are generally over the age of 64 or 65. Now, they have votes, and longevity has increased. They'll be around a while. There'll be a market for that age group, but it's not the future. Mr. Trump saw this and circumvented it. There are alternatives. that are genuinely fair and balanced and are conservatively oriented. One American News being one of them. The Sinclair Organization being another. There are alternatives to Fox. People like Roger Ailes, Glenn Beck, Bill O'Reilly, they don't just generally disappear. A Megyn Kelly will get crushed in the ratings, but a Bill O'Reilly will not. Now, there's no other news agency going to hire him of the existing mainstream cable ones. But the direct news, the future of news, he can help pioneer a future alternative to all cable news, including Fox if he wishes. I do believe that the Lord establishes leaders and removes them, as it says in Daniel. The only reason Brexit won is because of divine intervention here in Britain, against all expectations and odds. And the only reason that Mr. Trump won, against all expectations and odds, was divine intervention. God put him in the White House. What will become of his administration will depend on many things, but above all, it will depend on our prayers. Pat Robinson is a proven false prophet.
"1992 is going to be a year of calm. We've had a war, we've had revolutions, we've had hostages, we've had all these confusions and upheavals, but this is going to be a year of calm." Well, I think it could be a good time to do that, but it's certainly a good time to refinance. I think that by April or May, we'll see the lowest interest rates. Now I'm speaking me, not the Lord, but I think that we have a window of opportunity with interest rates as low as they are to save an enormous amount on refinancing. I think some people have done it already, but they're a little bit early, and we're getting in. The long rates still haven't come to where they will be, but they're coming down dramatically. Well, what this means is that President Bush is going to be reelected handily. There's just no question about it. The Lord showed me that in 91. He showed it to me again in 92. George Bush is going to be reelected for another term. Now, who the Democrats put up, I mean, it's really irrelevant. I mean, they've got probably Clinton is at the head of the field right now, but there's no front runner, and they're all fighting, so that really doesn't matter. And a year of calm, but calm before the storm. So again, my caution is, if there's some money to be made out in various investments, make it in the first part of the year, and then get solvent. Get solvent. Use this as an opportunity to get out of debt, get solvent, because we're going to some rocky financial times, I believe, in 1993.
He's an ecumenical fruitcake. He built a broadcasting empire on contributions and then finagled a way to sell it for hundreds of millions of dollars and pocket the money. He's a man who you cannot trust. He's made many false prophecies in the name of the Lord. He's gone into conferences with Roman Catholic figures like the priest Tom Forrest, who says that the purpose of the charismatic movement is to bring evangelicals into the Church of Rome. That's his agenda. And Pat Robinson's at conferences with him. Has Fox News outlived its usefulness now that Mr. Trump is elected? It was only there for a time, and now it's become redundant. It's time for alternative news, the kind of alternative vehicles that Mr. Trump used to circumvent the establishment, they can be used just as easily to circumvent Fox. Let's understand something. Fox came out on top largely by default because the others had gone so far to the left and been so unfair and unbalanced. They were not populist. Fox knew how to be populist, realizing that America is essentially a right-of-center nation that has a religious value or religious values and the national heritage. The others do not. Well, let Fox go the way it's going to. It can't be the same, obviously, without Roger Ailes, without Glenn Beck, without Bill O'Reilly now. It's not going to be what it was. And again, I like Sean O'Hannity. I like Neil Cavuto. I like Tucker. I like them. I wish them well. But the new management at Fox is not something that's motivated by strong principle. They would even rather lose market share in order to reconfigure Fox into a, not a clone of CNN, but something not visibly different from it. That's what seems to be happening. Of course, with the departure of Bill O'Reilly will likely go other people who were his friends, who he had regularly on his broadcasts. I'm sorry about that. But again, these are not people who will depart sitting down. There is a market for an alternative to Fox, and I hope it emerges. And I hope it'll be an alternative to mainstream media. I really like One Nation, One America News. I would encourage people to check it out. It's better than Fox as a whole. Just not as well developed as Fox, but its content is better. Well, let's conclude looking at one or two other issues. Europe. We've always believed that contemporary events in Europe, like contemporary events in the Middle East, are prophesied by the prophet Daniel. And as we see the desperation of Europe, after Brexit particularly, to make the iron stick to the clay, it's exactly what Daniel said would happen. Trying to hold these weaker economies in Europe in the orbit of the stronger ones. Marine Le Pen coming to power in France. Geert Wilders came in second place. He made tremendous gains in the Dutch election. Although he didn't come out first, he took seats away from the main party, and he's not far on back of them. He's a force to be reckoned with in Holland and in Europe. They've tried to sue him, they've tried to criminally prosecute him, and he remains a powerful force in Dutch and in European politics, thankfully, as does Nigel Farage by way of influence in Great Britain, even post-Brexit. But in France, it's another story. There is a danger. The Front National, the National Front in France, had a racist element and an anti-Semitic element. I'd like to think that Ms. Le Pen is not that, but some of her supporters are. But she realizes the threat of Islam for what it is. She stands in dire contrast to that ridiculous woman in Germany, Angela Merkel, who wants to invite radical Islamic rapists to the tune of 1 million into Germany to go on the dole. She's a crazy woman. She's out of control. I hope that people in Germany will have the sense to rise up and get rid of her, to choose an alternative chancellor. Nonetheless, in France, we have Ms. Le Pen. Watch the French elections very, very carefully. Remember, Western Europe will be a platform of Antichrist. Ultimately, the West will come into conflict with the Islamic world. The Antichrist will pose himself as somebody who can be the king of the north who can defeat the kings of the south. He'll replace something that happened in the days of Octavius and Antony and Cleopatra, prophesied in the book of Daniel. In Daniel chapter 10, Iran comes into play and comes in conflict with the West. This is going to happen again. Very, very clearly. It's something for the end times. Europe and its importance in prophecy cannot be overstated. The election in Holland was important. Brexit was more important because it's showing the desperation now of continental Europe to make the iron stick to the clay. Remember, it was the countries that were in the Roman Empire that count the most. Celtic Britain, Ireland, Wales, Cornwall in England, Scotland, they were never part of the Roman Empire. Most of England, but not all of it, was part of the Roman Empire. It never really was. Never. And continued to rebel against Rome under Boadicea and so forth. Constantine was a general in the city of York when he became emperor and stayed there for 2 years because he was afraid if he left Britain, Britain would leave the Roman Empire. It's always been an issue. Britain was never fully European, either was Ireland. Neither were the Scandinavian countries part of the Roman Empire, and neither was most of Holland. Only a small geographical slither of Holland was part of the Roman Empire. But France, Italy, Germany, Greece, Spain, Portugal, Luxembourg, Austria, Belgium, these were the countries. If we take the countries that are members of NATO, that are also members of the EU, and are also members of the Western European Union, interestingly, it comes to 10. Interestingly, it comes to 10. We deal with this in our book, Shadows of the Beast. Making the iron stick to the clay. How will this play out if Ms. Le Pen wins the election, or even gets so many seats she can inhibit the government from doing what it likes? The communists and extreme socialists have gone so far to the left in France, they've become ridiculous. They have a presidential candidate who wants 100% taxation on wealthy people. Why would wealthy people even work, let alone invest? Nonetheless, this election in France is not unimportant prophetically. Well, we have Europe, the Middle East, the Far East, the United States, the world. In each of these things, we see a stage being set. And that stage being set is being set for the return of the Lord Jesus. He may come in our lifetime, and he may come sooner than we think. One thing is for sure, his coming is sooner than when we first believed. Have a great week. Walk with Jesus. Tell people about Jesus this week. Share the good news. He is coming soon. God bless and thank you. My name is Jacob Prasch. Blessings, dear friends. Greetings in Jesus. This is your friend Jacob Prasch speaking to you at the moment from the UK. You know, so many of the questions we get in our Roku broadcast and on our Vimeo clips and on YouTube deal with subjects that we deal with much more extensively in our books. We can't, for the sake of brevity, go into the kind of depth in a TV broadcast we can actually go into in a book. But so many of the questions come from material that are expounded in the books on a much more broader scale that it's almost frustrating sometimes that we can't spend hours and hours answering the questions that are given to us. Obviously, practicality dictates that's not a possibility. The books are there. They're available. They're available in print through the Moriel catalog on the Moriel website, moriel.org. But in this day of Kindle and electronic books, they're also available through Amazon, and they're available through Kindle. The three books that would be the most referred to in the questions we receive are the three latest books. The first being The Dilemma of Laodicea. The Dilemma of Laodicea. It's an exposition of the 7 churches in Revelation, culminating with the final 2 churches, Philadelphia and Laodicea particularly, setting the stage for the return of Jesus. The Dilemma of Laodicea would be the first. The second would be Shadows of the Beast. Shadows of the Beast. How the coming Antichrist, how his identity will be revealed to the faithful church. The rapture will not happen. Will not happen, absolutely not happen, until the faithful church knows who the ultimate beast of Revelation is. That is the Antichrist and also the false prophet. How the identity of the coming Antichrist will be revealed to the faithful church. Shadows of the Beast, the second book. And the final and latest one, Harpazo. Harpazo. What the scripture actually teaches about the rapture, the snatching away which takes place between the 6th and 7th seals in the book of Revelation. So these 3 books, The Dilemma of Laodicea, Shadows of the Beast, and Harpazo, all available on the Moriel catalog, all available through Amazon, and all easily available electronically by Kindle. Thank you so much, dear friends. God bless. May Jesus be with you.